Like another jam.
I got that figured
Bo
out.
and Anderson, are they coming?
Runs out there in the
I think
street.
one of them
Okay.
said they weren't on, but I don't remember.
Okay. That's the street right there.
We're just barely gonna have a quorum.
You ready, Tom?
I know, Mark, you're ready, yeah.
Unless there's something else.
Okay, if I can have your attention, we'll call the September 2020 City of Rolla Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. You should have received the minutes. We had one small correction. We had the Shields boys mixed up in their motion, so got that straightened out. So other than that, I didn't see anything. Anybody else have any corrections or changes? If not, I'll rule those approved as printed and distributed. Report of city council action. Tom?
So at the last meeting, you had a minor subdivision. That was the one that was over in the West Side Marketplace area. That one was approved by the city council at their last meeting, actually last week.
Okay. Any questions on that from the council commissioners? We have no old business. We have one public hearing. It's a map amendment rezoning for a portion of 124 West Lions Club Drive from RR Rural Residential to C3 Highway Commercial District. Tom?
This is a request to rezone a portion, yeah, you said that. This is the air photo showing the entire property is outlined in red. In the whole L-shaped property, there's a house in the back and kind of a shop building kind of toward the front along Lions Club Drive. The semi-trailers you see on the air photo are no longer on the property. The property is off of Lions Club Drive. This is a zoning map showing the current zoning of the area. As I said, this property has two zoning districts on it. A portion of the property is zoned M2 currently, which is the heavy manufacturing zoning district. The portion on the north end, which has a house on it, is zoned RR Rural Residential. But then this eastern portion where the semi-trailers were located formerly is also zoned RR Rural Residential, but right now it's just an open field. So that is the area that is actually, yeah, got it in blue now. That is the area that is actually requested to be rezoned from the RR district to the C3 Highway Commercial District. C3 was chosen because M2 in this area didn't seem too likely to be approved, but C3 would still allow for the proposed use. The applicant is proposing kind of a landscaping supply type business. Right now, the way it would start out would be they supply a special blend of fertilized soil for gardens and whatnot, so they mix it on the site, and basically you come and get a truckload of dirt to bring to your property. At some point, the applicant talked a little bit more about that, so at some point they'd like to hopefully expand into other things, landscaping related, and maybe greenhouses and things like that. So the immediate concern is that some of the stockpiling they would like to locate some of that on the RR zoned area just to the east of that shop building. The majority of the business is proposed to take place on the currently M2 zone property. That stockpiling is what is requiring that a portion of the property be rezoned. If by chance the zoning was not approved, they do have the option of just operating the business on the currently M2 property. I guess the surrounding properties are mostly zoned, let's just say residential, for the areas that are immediately adjacent to the property. I did want to just kind of zoom out a little bit to give you a kind of wider view, because the area between Bishop, US 63, and kind of around Rolla Street and along Lions Club, right now you drive down a good portion of it and it's pretty rural. On either side there's a lot of areas that are kind of open and undeveloped. A lot of that is the Lions Club property is kind of a private park. But I would like to point out that these areas in purple, those are actually currently zoned commercial. Some of them do have commercial uses on them. But there are some commercial uses along Lions Club Drive. That's kind of what point I'm trying to make. The future land use map from the comprehensive plan does designate this area as being appropriate for neighborhood commercial uses. Those would be typically like restaurants, small retail, those sorts of things. It does designate some of the other areas around it as being appropriate for residential, and then it has the Lions Club Park is it's not owned by the public, but it's somewhat public. And then a portion of the Lions Club property is being appropriate for community commercial type uses. So point is the comprehensive plan does contemplate it being appropriate for some type of commercial uses in the area. Question is what is proposed meet that? This is just a street view showing down Lions Club. This here is that shop building I was referring to. As I said, the majority of the property is kind of just open right now. The property that was formerly used for a concrete plant way back before the property was annexed into the city, and that use stopped many years ago and hasn't really been commercial use on the property since then. So just to summarize, a portion of the property is zoned M2 heavy manufacturing already. I should point out that the M2 heavy manufacturing zoning, it allows for some things that you probably wouldn't expect for that area, such as formerly the concrete plant factories and manufacturing and those sorts of things. But it also doesn't even allow for things that commercial type uses that you would expect in the area, such as restaurants, daycare, churches, those sorts of things. Those aren't even allowed in the M2 district. And then the remainder of the property is currently zoned RR, which is a rural residential, and a portion of the property is still proposed to remain rural residential. As I said, the property formerly was a concrete plant. It hasn't been used for commercial uses in many years. The proposed a commercial use would be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The street type, the Lions Club Drive is an arterial street, and the long-term plans are that it kind of be an east-west connector across the city. And also surrounding uses, if you consider kind of a broader, from 63 all the way to Rolla Street, that entire area as being the surrounding area. The request is needed right now for some stockpiling and storage for a related business, perhaps allow for some expansion in the future, or if there was some desire for some other type of commercial business along the road, kind of sets that property up for that in the future. And normally I would have this last and after you talk, but I thought it'd be a good idea to go through the alternatives right now, just so that you've got some ideas to talk about as you're talking. So the alternatives normally would be the normal ones: to accept that the request meets the criteria necessary for approval and recommend that the City Council approve the request. We can also find that it meets the criteria but recommend approval for only a portion of the property. As I kind of alluded to, right now all they really need is a small section. The applicant can talk about that for the stockpiling, not that entire area that's requested. So if that's a little bit too much, that is an option, is just rezone a portion of the requested property. We can find that it meets their criteria, but recommend approval of this area plus rezoning of the M2 zone portion. I bring that up. I did advertise this in a way that would allow for that to be a possibility to happen with this request if that's the only way it would be approved. As I said, if for whatever reason the zoning was not approved, the applicant does have the ability to continue on and operate the business on the M2 portion. So if there was some desire not to have this business on that property, that still can happen. So the zoning wouldn't really turn that down. But something to think about might be, since that M2 property allows for some things that perhaps wouldn't be desirable for this area, could be something to exchange. Say, okay, well, we'll zone this one to C3 and let you have the C3 zoning for the the other portion, that might be kind of a compromise. We can find that the request meets the criteria for approval for some type of commercial zoning, but recommend that City Council approve a lesser zoning instead, such as C2 general retail or C1 neighborhood commercial. Neighborhood commercial would be kind of more in line with what the comprehensive plan showed for the area. We can find that the request is not appropriate and recommend that City Council deny the request, or of course table to a certain date. Do you have any questions for me before you move on to the public hearing?
Any questions for Tom?
I've got a couple.
Sure.
So, it looks like on the map, Tom, that the access to the buildings, 124, 114, 112, are through this property. Does what we're talking about have any impact on their ability to access the buildings through that property?
The house over here. So there is this driveway here that you're kind of talking about.
Yep.
What you might not be seeing under the red line here, there's also a road that
Yeah.
goes through here and then down here.
Oh, okay.
This area here actually has an easement that provides access for these properties.
Okay.
And then, not sure about 114, but then they have that one. So, I mean, the zoning wouldn't really affect
Okay.
access, and right now it's one family that owns all three of these properties that are shown on here. So, if something were to change with the access, it'd be kind of between them as it goes. The zoning wouldn't really affect that.
Okay. And then the other question is, and I'm not even real sure how to ask it, but in a landscaping business, I would assume that maybe at some point they would be looking at the potential to be selling pesticides of some sort or herbicides, and I'm wondering if that is compatible with the zoning that we're talking about, and how do we make sure that that works with the surrounding residential areas?
I think, and then another question that kind of related, that kind of has come up, one of the neighbors called and asked about manure stockpiling. So the M2 zoning, they could make pesticide and fertilizer if they wanted to build a plant to do that. So on the M2 zoning property, there's not much question. On the C3, as far as for an accessory to a landscaping type business, don't really see much problem with that. If for some reason the business morphed to just chemical sales, then that would probably be a different question if it was zone C3. As far as proper storage and whatnot, there are some building code type things that get into it. It just kind of all depends on the scale. If we're talking about a shelf with some jugs, then we're not really talking about much. If we're talking about having a big tank, there is some things in the building code that kick in for where that tank is sited and things like that. I think the applicant can talk a little bit about that, and that's kind of related to they're wanting to start small, and if things start going well, there's going to be a lot of other things on the property that will need to change as the business grows.
Their relatives and family live closest to the property. They're not going to put something there that will fit them, so I wouldn't think so.
We did have the semi-trailers there. Well, there's a story behind all that, so I don't know if that's 100%
It didn't
right.
bother anybody, though. They just sit there.
Yeah. But, and then the manure, talked with the applicant a little bit about that. I think they can answer that a little bit better also.
Okay, thank you.
It's RR now, they could have, for residential, you can have lots of things in RR that you can't have anywhere else. So. Any other questions for Mr. Tom?
If we go C3, now they can build buildings, storage buildings, office buildings, whatever they want to on there, correct?
Yes.
And once we change that, what are the parameters on the boundary between that and RR? Do they then have to establish some kind of a barrier or a distance?
Yeah, we were discussed that at one point. part of it is what is development. If for the stockpiling and whatnot, weren't really too worried about, too worried about that, because it's just sort of a pile of dirt on the ground. But as it develops and gets closer, then technically some of that kicks in. But then also got to figure, like, especially on that east side, there's already a bunch of trees there, and so perhaps just depends on where they are in relation to the property line, but perhaps those can just be preserved and serve as the boundary. But to answer your question, yes, even if it's in the family, the landscaping requirements would still kick in if the property were developed.
Well,
Perhaps not for what they have proposed now. Like I said, right now it's just a pile of dirt on the ground. But if they decided to sell out and build a McDonald's there, then McDonald's would have to have the screening between their property and the
well,
residential property.
well, okay, the family owns around there on the north, but I
Yeah.
don't believe that's the same family on the east, is it?
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah, so they drive in right past whatever we're creating here.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked about a buffer. And sometimes they might have to bring in a huge commercial grinder to grind up and make this mulch or whatever. So if you had to install that on someplace, you'd want some kind of a barrier, I would think. Visual, sound barrier, whatever, I don't know. But I was just thinking that if it's C3, there's something about a barrier there, if I
Yeah.
remember right.
I mean, we're getting into a little bit of the weeds, like the driveway, it's on their property, the easement is on their property, so the landscaping is required at the property line, so they could put a fence on the other side. They'd still have to drive through the commercial area and see all that and still meet the code technically. But, and then our sound proofing and whatnot, it's better to have whatever soundproofing you have nearer to whatever is causing the sound, rather than at the property line. At the property line, you'd have to give something that's 30 feet tall to actually block the sound, whereas at the, whatever it is, can be, just normal height. But,
Okay.
Any other questions? The applicant's asking, go back to your slide that has purple or blue. The applicant's asked, the request is to rezone the part in the blue from RR to C3, right?
Yes.
That's what we're being asked to do. Okay, is that clear? All right.
So we're not being asked to do the M2 to 3?
That wasn't their request.
that wasn't the applicant's request, but when it's not the notices and whatnot is broad enough and just describe the whole property and whatnot, so I don't have didn't at the time have the legal description for just the part in blue. And also wanted to leave it, because if by chance that did come up, that you didn't want to zone it C3 without getting rid of that M2, then they would have to start all over again. And so it's good that it kind of happened this way, so that it is an option if you did decide to, but that isn't really what the applicant wanted. I mean, that's not what they asked for. They may be okay with it, as opposed to it being denied outright.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll officially open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak to this issue, please come forward. State your name and address for the record. Please try to limit your comments to 5 minutes or less.
Do I gotta walk up there?
Yeah, they got TV camera, you gotta be famous, so if I have to, you have to, so.
My name's Nicholas Frost. I'm living at 124 West Lions Club. Couple points. With the pesticide production and pesticide sales, a big thing we're selling is organic compost. So we're very against selling pesticides. So that would be something that we would never really operate on there. We wouldn't have any sort of pesticide production. And we're also not actually going to produce mulch or compost or create mulch or compost on the property. It's all going to be purchased and brought in from Fulton. and it's all organic certified products. And then the one thing with the easements, 114 and 124 are family properties, and there is family living there now. 112 is 2 shop buildings, and 108 is a residential property, and they all have easements. 112 and 108 has an easement on the east side of the property. And then I think that's, I don't know if you guys had any other questions. So, and the big thing is it's not going to be a landscape company as much as it's going to be a mulch and compost business as far as being able to sell that. And we are very open to the M2 being rezoned as C3. That's not something that we're strong against it being M2 or C3. And then there is going to be, in the M2, we do have a small garden that we're going to sell stuff at the farmer's market and such. It's going to be very, very small scale. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Frost? Okay. Nick, you want to copy this? I've got an extra. Anybody else wishing to speak to this issue, please come forward, state your name and address. Seeing none, we'll officially close the public hearing. Questions or
Any questions for me?
coffee's done? Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Well, I'm wondering, on the M2, if we wouldn't be wise just to go ahead and take care of that, or we make the change on the other.
I agree.
He said he wasn't opposed to it, so.
It seems to me that it'd be cleaner to have all of it in the same zoning as opposed to 2 different zonings.
Any other discussion? So instead of the east side that goes down the middle, you would make it go straight across and leave the rural residential on the other part untouched. So,
Oh, what? Where they live?
yeah,
Yeah.
you need to make that when you make your recommendation.
So do we need to make a motion that we would,
If that's what you so desire, we need a motion, one way or another, either approve C3 for the property they're requesting, or some other hybrid motion of any kind you want to make.
all right, so I'll go ahead and move that we rezone the request to C3, but also rezone the M2 part of that property to C3.
You recommend that we do that?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to ignore the property owner's request and change it to a request to rezone the property that they requested along with the M2 to C3. Is that,
Well, after hearing that he didn't care,
well? Okay, any other questions or comments? Did you get the motion in second? Okay.
I did.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Okay. Everly,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Schmidt,
Yes.
Shields,
yes.
Kreider,
Yes.
Brown.
I don't get to vote.
You don't get to vote, that's
No, not unless
okay,
it's
I
tie.
got it.
They
No
don't
tie.
trust me with voting anymore, so. Motion carried to, you understand that, Nick, that they're,
Yeah,
and you can live with that?
totally fine.
I'm afraid the city council will do that to you anyway, so,
That's kind of what we were under the impression.
okay. Let's see. We have no reports, nothing from the chairperson, we have no committees. Tom, any other things to report?
No.
No, nothing? Any citizens' comments? If not, we're adjourned. Here's the next one. You can live,
I gotta go
you
get
can live with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to.
That's kind of what we were.